Welcome to Kinesiology 3500, Drugs in the Athletic Environment. I hope you all had a good break and are looking forward to a new semester here at Stanislaus State University. I thoroughly enjoy teaching drugs in athletics because it is always changing with new material to cover every time that I teach this course. Be sure to take time to review your syllabus, calendar your due dates for your assignments, and take your syllabus quiz as well as your survey on your views on drugs and athletics to earn your first points of the semester. If you look closely, you'll notice that hardly a week passes without a story in the news about an athlete or a performer who has been reprimanded, accused, or admitted of using performance-enhancing substances. A walk through the health food store or grocery store is rampant with ergogenic aids that claim to provide weight loss, increased strength, or improved physique. The higher the level of athletics, the higher the stakes, and the greater the presence of controlled substances that are used to improve performance in athletics. Well, how did we get to this point? It didn't start yesterday, last year, or even last decade. We'll take a brief look at some of the major events in recent history and in the not-so-recent past. Perhaps if you think about it, the first recorded performance-enhancing substance may very well have been Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden eating the forbidden fruit, giving them godlike power and knowledge. Man has always had a desire to be better than he was naturally capable. The use of drugs to enhance performance in sports has certainly occurred since the time of the original Olympic Games, which was from 776 BC to 393 BC, and the origin of the word doping is attributed to the Dutch word doop, which is a viscous opium juice, and it was considered the drug of choice of the ancient Greeks. The ancient Olympic champions were professionals who competed for huge cash prizes as well as olive wreaths to wear. Most forms of what we would call cheating were perfectly acceptable for them, except for fixing an event. There is evidence that they had gorged themselves on meat, which was not a normal dietary staple of the Greeks, and experimented with herbal medications in an effort to enhance their performances. The ancient Greek athletes also drank wine potions, used hallucinogens, ate animal hearts, or even testicles in search of potency. Gladiator competitions and chariot races were popular in ancient Roman culture, so much so that the Colosseum needed to be expanded to hold 60,000 spectators for these battles. The chariot racers sought to gain an advantage by feeding their horses substances such as hydromel, which is an alcoholic beverage made from honey, to make them run faster, and gladiators took hallucinogens and stimulants such as strychnine to fight off the effects of fatigue and injury and improve their focus and intensity. The American Civil War infantrymen were known as coffee boilers to stay awake, alert, and ready for any battle situation that came their way. Coffee was rationed to the soldiers and was prevalent throughout the camps. The 1960s were not the decade of drug experimentation. In fact, in 1889, a French physician named Charles Brown Secord, at the age of 72, extracted testicular fluid from dogs and guinea pigs and injected it into his own body. He announced his findings at a scientific meeting in Paris and claimed to feel years younger with renewed energy. The use of drugs in sports began in earnest in the late 19th century with preparations made from the coca leaf, which is the source of cocaine. A widely used mixture of coca leaf and extract in wine called vin mariani. It was called the wine for athletes. It was used heavily by French cyclists. Coca and cocaine were popular because they staved off the sense of fatigue and hunger brought on by prolonged exertion. 24-hour cycling events were very popular back then, and fighting off hunger and fatigue were necessary for victory. Champion cyclist Arthur Linton unfortunately died from using a stimulant, trimethyl, in Paris, France in 1886. Early marathon champion Thomas Hicks had to be revived after winning the 1904 Olympic Marathon in St. Louis. He was given a concoction of brandy and strychnine by his management team on his team to help him fight the pain and fatigue and finish the race. Oddly enough, in this race, the first man to cross the finish line was disqualified for hitchhiking a ride for a significant part of the race which opened the door for Thomas Hicks to win the race. Our text will cover how narcotics have been used by endurance athletes to fight through the pain of competition. Anabolic steroids were not created by some mad scientist in an underground laboratory. Its modern roots began over 75 years ago by German chemist Adolf Butenandt. The original therapeutic intention was to treat hypogonadism. Anecdotal accounts of the use of steroids to create aggressiveness and strength in Nazi Germany's soldiers of the Third Reich. Hitler's irrational behavior has been attributed to the abuse of various drugs as well. In 1945, a text called The Male Hormone, written by Paul de Croof, was introduced, and it introduced the notion that synthesized anabolic steroids have the potential to rejuvenate individuals and improve their productivity. De Croof wrote that hormones cause the body to synthesize protein and were able to build the very stuff of life. De Croof's work had a profound impact on sports, and he even suggested that it would have a significant effect on industry and production in manufacturing. In the 1940s and 1950s, Dr. John Ziegler studied the rampant use of steroids and testosterone derivatives to increase strength and size of the weightlifters at the York Barbell Club in the United States. The compound that he synthesized became known as the anabolic steroid Dianabol. Even in the 1960s, Sports Illustrated had reported on our drug-happy athletes, indicating that drug use was rampant in not only sports performance, but combating pain. In 1967, British cyclist Tommy Simpson was the first athlete to die in competition on worldwide television during the 1967 Tour de France. He had been found with amphetamines, which is a stimulant, actually with some in his sock and in his bloodstream, and was carrying them with him in his final climb on Mount Verdú. He was not at all alone in his the use of performance-enhancing substances among the peloton, and his death led to sweeping changes in the international cycling community and in the International Olympic Committee leading up to the 1968 Mexico City Olympics. Tommy Simpson's attitude was common among cyclists to do whatever it takes to win, including using harmful drugs. He was once quoted as saying, "If it takes 10 pills to kill me, I'll take 9 and win." The tour continued the next day as scheduled with a brief moment of silence, and the peloton paid tribute by ensuring that a British rider win that day's stage race. Back in 1989 and 1990, before the fall of communist bloc countries, East German athletes were highly successful during the 1960s and 70s. There was about 40 years from around the time after World War II to about 1990 that Germany was divided into 2 separate East and West countries, with East Germany as a communist nation that practiced government-sanctioned sports performance and the use of banned substances and harmful substances to gain an advantage. This small country had considerable success in the Olympic Games during this period. The women athletes were widely known to use, but not tested for, the use of anabolic steroids, and many opposing swimmers, including United States swimmers, thought that there were men in the ladies' locker room because of their deep voices. One of the replies by an East German swimmer was tongue-in-cheek, "We came here to swim, not to sing." A very prominent figure in the battle for detecting drugs and their use is Dr. Don Catlin, who was the director of the drug laboratory that was established drug testing during the 1984 Olympics. He is famous for cracking the code during the Balco investigation that indicated the use of the drug THG, or tetrahydrogesterone, known as the Clear. It was a designer drug designed to evade drug testing. In 1986, NBA basketball draftee Len Bias died of a cocaine overdose. It was one of the highest profile drug death cases in sport. Len Bias was considered by many to be the best all-around player in the 1986 draft when he was selected by the Boston Celtics. He had his whole life in front of him, and he was cut down by a grave choice to take and then overdose on drugs, specifically cocaine. This, in essence, shot a hole in the history of the NBA, as it would have likely prolonged the Eastern Conference dominance of the Celtics and delayed the rise of the bad boy Detroit Pistons, and may have altered the Chicago Bulls' string of championships in the 1990s. No sport holds their statistics more sacred than baseball. A player's statistics are a measure of their ability. For instance, a pitcher who wins 20 games in a season, or has 300 strikeouts in a season, or 300 wins in a career is considered to be very successful. A hitter who has a 300 average, or 200 hits in a season, or 3,000 hits in a career is also considered to be very successful. Very few athletes can reach these milestones, and when several do, and many do at one time, and they aren't considered prominent players or all-stars, or they can continue playing productively long after their predecessors would have since retired, then those statistics become skewed and the records can get cheapened. So we see here players such as Sammy Sosa, who had dramatic changes in their physical strength and size throughout their career. When they were confronted with these changes in their size and their performance in the field, they were denied ever using performance-enhancing substances. Here we see some now very famous pictures of Barry Bonds early in his career, where he is much leaner, and Barry Bonds later in his career, where you can see the obvious change in size of his physique. His story is very convoluted and has many twists and turns to it, and has become, once again, as we discussed, the importance of statistics in baseball and the use of drugs during the quote-unquote steroid era, keeping him from being in the Hall of Fame or recognized. That sentiment seems to be changing in the recent years, but was very much a punitive measure to show players like himself and Roger Clemens to not be quote-unquote worthy of being in the Hall of Fame because of their use of performance-enhancing substances. Marion Jones was a central figure in the Balco investigation. She is a multiple track and field winner at the 2000 Sydney Olympics. She was also the USA's top hopeful in the 2004 Athens Games, and she was involved in using designer steroids created by the Bay Area Laboratory Cooperative, also known as Balco. 2006 Tour de France winner Floyd Landis was stripped of his title after failing to pass a drug test and tested positive for his testosterone to epitestosterone levels, or his T/E ratios. 4-to-1 is considered a normal T to E ratio, and his was far beyond that. These are now measured in terms of physiological changes in the athlete biological passport. Drugs are no longer tested directly for, but tested indirectly through the ABP. He has recently spoken out quite vocally about the systemic use of performance enhancers in the cycling world, and he is a former U.S. Postal teammate of Lance Armstrong and has spoken out about Lance Armstrong's use and requirement of his teammates to use performance-enhancing substances. Again, the description of doping is the use of a substance in an excess amount for the specific purpose of improving performance. This is true not only in sports, but in warfare or any other area where a high level of performance over a length of time or to accomplish a goal is necessary. So as we can see here from this slide, there are many different reasons and objectives that an athlete has for using performance-enhancing substances and drugs. We can see that stimulants such as caffeine, amphetamines, and cocaine are used used as stimulants to build muscle and bone. Anabolic steroids, relaxants such as alcohol, beta blockers, which are heart medications, and cannabinoids such as marijuana as relaxants. To mask the use of drug use, diuretics are commonly used to excrete or urinate banned substances out of athletes' systems so they can avoid detection of drug use. Diuretics are also used to reduce weight in sports that require you make weight, such as wrestling and boxing. Increasing oxygen delivery, such as EPO, erythropoietin, or blood doping, which can increase the oxygen content in your blood, and to mask pain, such as narcotics and local anesthetics. The categories of performance-enhancing substances are as varied as the athletics themselves, from what athletes use to improve performance to the drugs that are used recreationally. These substances can be both chemically and behaviorally addictive. Whether it's anabolic steroids, creatine, or androstenedione to increase strength and power, or amphetamines, ephedrine, and caffeine that are used as stimulants and weight loss aids, to blood doping and EPO, athletes, trainers, coaches, and team physicians will always be looking for some type of competitive edge in competition. Here we look at some testosterone precursors, androstenedione being one of them, made famous by Mark McGwire during the 1998 record-breaking season. After the baseball strike of 1994, baseball's image had been hurt significantly and attendance was down. In 1998, Mark McGwire and Sammy Sosa helped revive baseball and give it a desperate shot in the arm. The home run record-breaking season of 1998 was fueled by McGwire's use of androstenedione and Sosa's alleged use of anabolic androgenic steroids. Nevertheless, fans came out in record numbers and revenue increased dramatically. What can you say? People love the long ball. Factors involved in the record-breaking season also included a tighter strike zone for pitchers, a lower mound so pitchers could not pitch as fast, shorter fences in the newly created baseball-only ballparks that opened up in the 1990s, including Baltimore's Camden Yards, Jacobs Field in Cleveland, AT&T Park in San Francisco, and most every town that wanted to escape the prison-like feel of a multi-use football/baseball stadium, such as the Oakland Coliseum, shared by both the Raiders and the Oakland A's. Drug testing samples come in two common forms, urine and blood. Blood tends to be more reliable and can give better information on how a substance might influence someone's physiology, but is obviously more invasive and you can risk possible infection. Urine samples are less invasive but rely on the patient's or the athlete's ability to produce a sample or urinate after an exhausting event that they may have been dehydrated or compromised. There have been reported cases of athletes falsely testing positive for steroids and performance-enhancing substances by ingesting food that was tainted by these substances. This is indeed a disturbing revelation about our food supply, for one thing, and we will learn more about this in various other parts of nutrition throughout the semester. But a lot of this has been covered in films like Food Incorporated, where our steroids and various other genetically altered drugs are used in our food supply. Steroid drugs such as nandrolone, methanolone, and trenbolone, and bronchodilators such as clenbuterol have all been linked to tainted sources in our meat, poultry, and other parts of our food supply. In terms of the future of drug testing in the future needs to consider the aggressive and competitive world of designer drugs and steroids. Urinalysis will need to be more sensitive. Sample methods will need to be more reliable, as they will be the subject of intense scrutiny, particularly by those who test positive and question the validity and reliability of some of these tests. The same health and medical advances and progress that we have been having, we also look forward to being applied to performance-enhancing substances such as gene doping, blood replacement, stem cells, and the Human Genome Project will shed light on what can be done in terms of the fight against using performance-enhancing substances and what will be considered safe and what will be considered banned. Entertainers, sports figures, all have been linked to using performance-enhancing substances. Our culture tends to use these drugs frequently, with common vocations also being associated with performance-enhancing substances such as law enforcement and correctional officers. Recreational sport users that don't have the risk of drug testing will also use performance-enhancing substances to use just to win a softball tournament or an amateur contest of any type of sport or activity. Here we see recreational drug use commonly linked to professional athletes, not necessarily to improve their performance, but used like any other person would in society and culture for recreational use in terms of a lifestyle choice or just how they unwind. Here we see ephedra has been linked to several athletic deaths and has been summarily taken off the market for weight loss management. Corey Stringer of the Minnesota Vikings, Steve Beckler of the Baltimore Orioles, and football player Rashidi Wheeler from Northwestern University have all unfortunately died with their deaths being linked to the use of ephedra. 1965 Gatorade was introduced into the mainstream market. It was created by chemists at the University of Florida to help their athletes that were exercising in a very humid climate to replenish their fluid and electrolyte levels. Over the years, it has changed in the amount of sugar it contains. It's not a table drink. There's too much sodium and other electrolytes that our body naturally replenishes. But these drinks are very good if you are in competition or training at a high level to replenish fluids and electrolytes. Such as energy drinks today, they contain caffeine, sugar, and various herbal stimulants. Even with the herbal stimulants, you can't assume that something, just because it's natural, is good for you. Cardiac complications, including palpitations, tachycardia, angina, and other potential dangerous side effects, have been reported with the use of these hyper-stimulating energy drinks that are quote-unquote natural. So we're going to wax a little philosophical here and just ask ourselves, what is cheating? Are all banned substances performance enhancing? We'll take a strong look at things like marijuana. Sporting events have been manipulated throughout history with rule changes and equipment changes and facility improvements and training techniques and access to them. This is considered acceptable. Things like altitude training definitely improves performance, but is that a banned way of training if it's available to athletes? It's not considered so in the World Anti-Doping Agency. So as we're aware, athletes will take various substances that may or may not be proven to be performance enhancing. However, the governing bodies of various sports organizations have changed the rules and designs of the game to where it is difficult to compare the same sports today to what it was a generation or years ago. This has a lot to do with the records being broken, the differences in the games as athletes who participate. In the America's Cup, this is a yacht race. In 1983, the America II used a winged keel on its hull, and it caused a controversy. You can see the way it's flanged out on the bottom of this boat. That caused a big stir. Well, now today the America's Cup is so different that these boats aren't even a single hull boat. They use multi-hull boats, pretty much a catamaran, to race in now, to where this whole issue from 1983 is a moot point. At the time, it was a major story in sport. In basketball, there are various rule changes that may affect the way statistics and the sport is interpreted. Dunking was outlawed in the NCAA in the college ball from 1967 to 1976. This is commonly called the Alcindor rule, after Lou Alcindor or Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was dominating the game, and they outlawed it. Now we see it's pretty much ubiquitous with basketball at any level. Dribbling rules have changed. There still is carrying over and traveling, but it's not called very often. Previously, you would only have 5 fouls in the NBA before you were disqualified. Now you get 6 fouls, allowing players to stay in the game longer and score more and get more rebounds and other statistics. Used to be the basketball had a narrower key. and no three-point line. So it allows for a more open and fast-paced basketball with these rule changes. Baseball, as we know and have stated before, statistics are very important, very meaningful, but there have been changes in rules and in facilities of baseball. There's a lower pitcher's mound, a smaller strike zone, which favors hitters as well. The designated hitter will also favor more scoring. Less foul ground in ballparks, which makes it difficult for pitchers to get easy outs. And shorter distance in the outfield fences, making for more home runs. For what baseball does allow, it won't allow things like having a corked bat.
Yet baseball will not allow corked bats, spitballs, or doctoring up to baseball, excessive pine tar on a bat for hitters, and they don't even allow managers to wear normal clothes. They aren't playing anyway. Why wear the uniform? Performance-enhancing substances that players claim help them recover from injury so they can honor the contract they signed by continuing to play. This was Andy Pettit of the New York Yankees' excuse for using human growth hormone.
There's also been changes in football just about every other year to address problems that have to do with preventing injuries or preserving fairness and equity in the game. In the process, the game has changed, and in a sense it has been manipulated so that you no longer can compare the game of football or individual performances with those that preceded these rule changes. As we see here, a great hit by a free safety might be called leading with the helmet today, or an infraction, leading to either a 15-yard penalty or perhaps even an ejection from the game. A rugged quarterback that can evade a sack and throw a touchdown might be considered in the grasp, and they would whistle the play dead. A linebacker can force a fumble while tackling the running back, but if the ground causes the fumble, the offense will keep the ball. So just take a look at some basic review questions here. Caffeine is an example of what? Hallucinogen, depressant, analgesic, or stimulant? We see that it's an example of a stimulant. Alcohol and sleeping pills are examples of inhalants, beta blockers, depressants, or stimulants. The answer being, it's a depressant.